Welcome to Equity Matters, Navigating Equity Compensation, a webinar series hosted by Countsy. Today, we will give the answers to what is a transfer agent and how they can make my life easier. Today's guests are Coletta, Senior Director Equity Accounting and Administration at Countsy, Rob Schoder, CEO of Vinyl Equity, and Carine Schneider, Founding Partner at Compass Strategic Advisors. We hope you enjoy this conversation, and Carine, now over to you.
Well, great to see everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Really excited to have Rob and Carine here. I think this is one of those topics that I go to cocktail parties all the time. And when people find out that I know anything about a transfer agent, I get about 10 people running up and asking me some technical questions. So I'm going to ask all those technical questions today and tell all my friends to go listen to this webinar. So I'm excited to be joined this morning by Coletta, who runs stock plan administration for Countsy, and by Rob Schoder, who is the CEO of Vinyl Equity. Carine, can you just quickly give us a little bit about your background, and then we'll have Rob introduce himself, and then we'll jump into things.
Sure. Hi, my name is Carine, and I am the Senior Director of Equity Accounting and Administration at Countsy. Countsy provides outsourcing accounting, HR operations, equity administration services, and more for startups, scale-ups, and spin-outs.
Great. And how long have you been in the business? Quite a long time, I believe.
Yes. So with Countsy, 9 years now.
Wow. Okay, great. And you run the team there, right? Of the people
Yes.
who manage the outsourcing. Okay.
I head up the equity administration team here.
Great. And Rob, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Rob Schoder. I'm the founder and CEO of Vinyl Equity. Vinyl is the first transfer agent operating on novel technology in the last 30 or 40 years. So if you can imagine, if you are a public company and you aren't working with Vinyl, the tech stack that you are working off of with your transfer agent was that really most current, built in 1997. Everybody else a couple decades before that. Founded Vinyl about 4 years ago after a couple of particularly challenging years at a company called AngelList, trying to figure out how to efficiently navigate transfer agents in what was probably one of the biggest liquidity booms of the last several decades. We did 230 IPOs across our portfolio in a year, and every time it felt like we were reinventing the wheel. And so I took my experience there and really tried to apply a framework of what would I have preferred the transfer agent experience to be. And that sort of set the foundation for what we've built at Vinyl today. So.
Nothing better than an unhappy client knowing what needs to be fixed. So that's great. Well, let's just start at the beginning, Rob, with just what is a transfer agent, because not everybody understands that. And when do you need one?
Yeah. So there are a couple of different constructs. I'll start with when you need a transfer agent. Every publicly traded company in the United States is required to have a transfer agent. There are a couple of other constructs in which you might need a transfer agent, mutual funds, ETFs, any business that raises from a number of shareholders and qualifies under Reg CF. But Vinyl is specifically built for public companies or companies that are prepping to go public. The SEC defines a transfer agent as the official registrar for public companies. And if you ask the SEC, they would tell you that the source of truth for a public company's share ownership is a transfer agent. I think the reality is, if you ask most of their clients if they trust their transfer agent as the source of truth, there are very few that actually do. But over the years, transfer agents have expanded their services to include proxy tabulation and administration, corporate actions management, a number of governance-related solutions, and have just sort of expanded the scope of the role. And Vinyl serves in all of those capacities.
All right, we're going to get to you in a moment, Carine, on how you interact with the transfer agent. But Rob, this is a regulated business, being a transfer agent. Can you explain a little bit about the regulatory framework in the U.S.? Who you have to comply with?
Yeah, the SEC oversees transfer agent regs, I think as you look at the regulatory framework and maybe the broader capital markets infrastructure stack, the SEC ultimately oversees transfer agents and is the regulatory entity, but the DTCC is a critical element of the sort of approvals framework. You have DTC eligible transfer agents, and you have what are called DRS or limited participant transfer agents. And within that context, there are sort of three tiers in the DTCC. It is actually not that difficult to become a transfer agent in the United States, or an SEC approved transfer agent in the United States. You kind of have to fill out a form, and if you haven't been convicted of a felony, they'll generally bless it within 30 days. But it is more complicated to become a DTCC eligible and limited participant transfer agent, and so that's where we generally see the hurdles implemented in the space.
Okay, helpful. So just as before we jump into the technical stuff, tell us a little bit about the principles that you employed when you were building your solution at Vinyl. What was important to you as you were building it?
I mean, I think the world that we live in today puts a priority or an emphasis on visibility, transparency, and accountability. And those are sort of the three driving principles, with the overarching thesis that what we call the Amazonification of everything. Everybody wants, whether it's access to information or goods delivered to their doors instantaneously. And so the real-time nature of the platform that we built was critical, but the only way that we could accomplish visibility, transparency, and accountability was by building a solution that was capable of integrating with every service provider that a transfer agent might encounter. And one of the things that you'll find with legacy infrastructure is that they're built on mainframe solutions. Their technology will predate literally the invention of the API, and it makes it very difficult to collaborate with other service providers and other service solutions. And so, as we thought about visibility, transparency, and accountability, one of the themes that became very evident to us was that we needed to build the ability to integrate with any other service provider. And we see this very frequently in the equity plan administration space, where there are a number of dependencies on the transfer agent to release and deliver shares to employees. We built frameworks that enable equity plan solutions to engage with us programmatically and eliminate the manual interaction. In doing that, we actually eliminate risk, right? We solve for manual redundant tasks in which you have multiple parties entering the same information, and that leads to discrepancies in outcomes. We wanted to avoid that.
Yeah, and I would say most of the software or technology predates the internet, right? Because it really wasn't around till about the 2000s or so that we really started seeing people going online to a browser and doing something. So very interesting.
Yeah, it's all rooted in a world where the paper stock certificate is the standard. Right. And over the last 15, 20 years, we've moved away from that pretty meaningfully.
Yeah. So Carine, you're one of these clients of a transfer agent. You work with a lot of your own company, your own corporate clients who require you then to interface with the transfer agent. So let's start with some of the frustrations that you have in working with these transfer agents. And we're not going to name any, but just, what are some of the overarching themes?
So as a stock plan administrator, we interact daily with transfer agents just to get shares moved at the end of the day after transactions have happened. While most of the interactions are positive, we are experiencing some frustrations with the transfer agents. Some of the issues that we experience are delayed in the transfer agent actually getting the shares to the broker. So we have a deadline, right, to get those shares moved over. And there's times when we're missing that deadline just because the transfer agent isn't looking at the DWACs that were provided to them and moving the shares. We have also experienced incorrect processing of DWACs. So in some cases, the shares are being pulled from the wrong reserve, which causes discrepancies when trying to reconcile at month and quarter end. So despite what the paperwork is showing, they're still pulling the shares from another plan, which causes the imbalance at the end of the month. We're also finding with the transfer agents that there's a lack of response. So in most cases, we're given email aliases to direct our inquiries to, and it's either the boxes are not being looked at and they're not responding from there, or we try to contact our relationship manager and they're not getting back to us. And this all results in delays of shares and unhappy brokers when they're not getting what they need on time.
Right, and unhappy clients in the end. And yeah, I remember I've been on both sides of this coin, both as someone who does what Karen does and somebody who does what Rob does. And at some point the broker does start to charge the client, right, if the shares don't arrive, because then there's an interest charge that starts to be incurred. Yeah, very interesting. So let's talk about for a moment, you work with a lot of private companies, Karen, and a lot of, pre-IPO. So it's generally when they're private, they're not using a transfer agent. They're on a cap table system. The cap table system is managed by anybody that you would like. It could be a box of paper, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be one of the systems. But at some point that data has to move into a transfer agent. So talk to me a little bit about that process and how hard it is, and how much is the transfer agent actually involved in helping with this?
So usually right before the client will go IPO, usually about 12 to 18 months beforehand, we suggest that they engage with a transfer agent, right? Because there's a lot of prep that goes into once they do go IPO and become public with getting the shares registered to their employees or participants. So moving the data from a cap table system to a transfer agent is a very detailed process that involves multiple steps to ensure that the legal ownership, record keeping, and compliance are properly transferred over to the transfer agent when they are public. So basically, we need to first confirm that the cap table is accurate. So you're going to want to reconcile all the data to make sure that the share classes, the ownership totals, the legends, anything attached to those shares is correct and confirmed, usually by a third-party legal firm. Then usually we have a mass issuance file which needs to be prepped. And what this is really just an Excel spreadsheet that every transfer agent uses so they can upload it into their database. And basically it contains like the shareholder demographic detail, as well as all the information regarding the ownership of the shares. So it's the share designation, the number of shares, any legends that are attached to them, as well as the restrictions. And basically, once this spreadsheet of all the historical data of the stock certificates is completed, we hand it over to the transfer agent. And then the transfer agent will upload it into their database. We'll do a final review. And then once we sign off on that, then the transfer agent will become the record keeper of the shares. And we'll use that as a source of truth going forward. So it's very detailed. This process usually takes at least 6 to 8 weeks because you have to make sure that it ticks and ties to what your cap table has, because this is ownership of shares to your individual participants.
Right. And Rob, you see the other side of that. So what are some of the hiccups you see in this process?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't make the transfer agent decision until right before they file the S1, or in some cases after they file the S1. Our opinion is, Karen is like spot on, aligned, that you should make the transfer agent decision when you make the equity plan decision, because then you can actually make sure that you have an integrated solution. You've done proper vetting, you've aligned the decisions to one another so that you've got partners that work well with each other. I think most transfer agents just aren't used to that type of decision-making process. And as a result, I think you find a lot of transfer agents that, kind of sit tight for a little bit. And they'll say, yes, we've got, our ear to the ground. We know what's happening here, but we don't think anybody's going to make the decision. Our preference would be that, companies hire us, retain us, in whatever capacity in advance of an IPO, about 12 to 18 months. One of the novelties about Vinyl is that we can actually begin to mimic in parallel the capital structure of the business, because we have a very nimble product. And we've done this for a couple of clients already that have gone public on the platform. We've begun to ingest shareholder records and give access to the platform in advance of the IPO to put people at ease. I think a lot of the time, because transfer agents do everything on an as needed basis, or it becomes very confusing for shareholders to say, hey, where are my shares? If my transfer agent doesn't contact me until after the IPO, but before the lockup has been lifted, what happened to this life-changing moment that was such a momentous occasion in my life? And we want to solve for that. And so from a collaboration perspective, from a coordination perspective, it probably does take about 6 to 8 weeks to ensure that everything everything is correct. But save for file formatting and outputs, Vinyl is the recipient of a lot of that work, or the downstream recipient of that work. And we think the transfer agent should be a more collaborative partner in that capacity than they probably are in most cases today.
Yeah, I've seen too, especially with the lawyers, where they're filing the S1. Then I think in the S1 you have to say who your transfer agent is, and so they're filing in 3 hours, and they call up and they say, "Hey, quick, we need a transfer agent. Who do you know?" And it's not the way to really make it such an important decision. It's definitely something that people need to investigate and research. And I think the other thing too is I find a lot of people saying, "Well, I've used this company for the last 10 times, so I'm going to use them for the 11th time," not realizing that things have changed and that some of the frustrations, Carine, you've mentioned, are out there and maybe require some investigation, but it is sometimes to the last minute.
Yeah, and I think, Carine, just to that point, this is an industry that really hasn't changed in 40 years, right? 30 or 40 years. And so a lot of people, I think, get, comfortable enough. I don't think I personally, and, recognizing that when I started this business, I was a bit of an outsider. I don't think I've spoken to a single person who loves their transfer agent. At best, I hear indifference. And I hear indifference because of all the reasons that Carine highlighted. I mean, the idea that transfer agents are drawing down reserves from the wrong pools based on, whatever DUAC letter is provided to them is because there is a disconnect in the interaction between plan administrator and transfer agent, and because the transfer agent is a services organization where they're manually entering information. But a more connected ecosystem can solve for those problems. So a more connected ecosystem can eliminate all of that. And that's what Vinyl was built for, was to bring this business, this industry into, the 21st century, right? We need to step out of 1997, or 1985 or 78 and into 2025.
Well, another issue there is then cost. So let's talk a little bit about the costs that get involved with this. And the one I hate the most is the medallion signature guarantee. And that's probably the most common question I get at cocktail parties, which is, what is it? Why do I have to do it? Why is it expensive? And it's really frustrating. And for a lot of, I live in Silicon Valley, so a lot of these people are venture capitalists who are saying, why do I have to do this? Why can't my assistant just take care of transferring these shares? So let's talk a little bit about medallion signature guarantees, but maybe, Rob, quickly, what is it? And, has Vinyl come up with a way to maybe get around the need for this? Is it really still necessary 40 years later?
Yeah. So the SEC states that every transfer agent needs to have some system of verifying likeness and liveness for a transfer. The way that the medallion signature guarantee is essentially the industry standard mechanism for validating likeness and liveness. And what it is a blank piece of paper with transaction that's filled in with transaction details. And you go to a financial institution that's a participant in the medallion program, and you present them your ID. They give you a green stamp on your piece of paper. And the green stamp says nothing other than the branch of the financial institution that that provided the medallion. You then have to mail that paperwork to your transfer agent, and your transfer agent will then process the transaction. The entire thing, end to end, if you're a shareholder and you can find anybody that will give you a medallion signature guarantee, can take weeks. And frankly, it's a relic of a bygone era, and it's something that any company that's using modern technology shouldn't be subject to because of, the introduction of technology involving KYC and things like that. And so Vinyl has created a solution that we've embedded into the platform that actually allows us to verify and validate likeness and liveness instantaneously at the time of transaction, thereby eliminating the medallion signature guarantee requirement, or alternatively, an alternative way of framing it is satisfying the SEC's requirements for validating identity. And so anybody that's fed up with the medallion signature guarantee, process, we're happy to talk to. But it is a novelty, and it's something that we really believe shouldn't exist in this market, because there are more objective ways of validating that somebody is alive and somebody is who they say they are in the world we live in today.
And just to be clear, the company can decide if they still want the medallion signature guarantee, but I would guess most companies don't. But you will entertain both. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, you'll see different companies, establish different thresholds for medallion waivers and things like that. Generally, when you get in the upper bound of transactions, you want some measure of risk mitigant. And so, people look to the medallion program historically as the only solution to validate and insulate from risk. And so, our perspective is very different. It's that we have a much more objective and risk-free mechanism based on security protocols. We're one of the only transfer agents in the market that's SOC 2, Type 2, GDPR, CCPA, and ISO 27001 compliant out of the box. Everybody else, is sort of trying to figure that out with their technology infrastructure that predates those compliance certifications. And so, our belief is that we can create a more efficient path to transact.
Okay. So that's certainly cost in terms of time and going to the bank and finding somebody and all those things, and maybe it taking forever as it does with me. Carine, let's talk about DWACs. That's a real sunk cost for companies. So explain what a DWAC is and how you process it. And then maybe Rob, you can respond how you guys are handling that, because that is, I think, one of the big problems you have with the transfer agent.
So the DWAC is really moving the shares from the transfer agent to the broker when a transaction occurs. So on a daily basis, we're doing this as stock plan administrators to settle transactions that occurred that day. When we do this, we try as best we can to automate the process, meaning that whatever platform the client is using, we will have that generate their transfer agent letter for us and email it over to the transfer agent, who will then act upon it. 99% of the time it works, where we are getting the shares in. But there are circumstances where maybe the letter doesn't generate, or the transfer agent doesn't pick it up and the shares aren't moved. What I think people fail to realize is there's a fee with every DWAC that is being processed, and the client needs to pay that fee. I don't want to say it's a hidden cost, but it's an out-of-pocket fee that the client needs to pick up. It's not cheap. It's not like it's $10 a DWAC. So DWACs are costly, but they need to be done. There's no other way for us to move these shares from the transfer agent to the broker without doing the DWAC.
So let's say you had 10 employees exercise their stock today. Do you send 10 letters, or do you send one letter covering all 10 from a pricing perspective?
So we're sending one letter for all 10 with specific instructions if there's different reserves that the shares need to be pulled from. But if we have exercises and restricted stock releases and an ESPP, each one is sending a separate DWAC. So that would be 3 DWACs in one day. Usually this will occur like at the end of the quarter when we're processing releases and purchases. So it can become very costly for the client.
Yeah. Especially if you think about it, if you have to do this every business day of the year, that's expensive. So Rob, tell us, how are you responding to DWACs? Because I think you guys look at it a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of time I spend clarifying with people the way that DWACs get charged back to them is kind of crazy, because Carine, you're right. Transfer agents they've sort of snuck this one by a lot of the market. And they've been, I think, supported in a lot of ways by the financial institutions that used to get charged them. So essentially a DWAC fee is a charge that the transfer agent levies to the DTCC that gets passed on to the broker. If you are a company that has a captive broker for your plan, that means that the broker has, clear line of sight and an understanding that they can pass those charges on to you. And very likely it's worked into your contract. During the low interest rate environment, a lot of financial institutions are actually eating DWAC fees. They weren't charging them to clients. And when we started the business, we started to hear these rumblings that for the first time, companies were getting hit with $10,000 bills every quarter or something like that they hadn't seen years before. And they're saying, it's my plan administrator who's charging me these fees. But the reality is these are transfer agent fees. And in a lot of cases, the transfer agents will take a step back and they'll say, oh, that's not a transfer agent fee to you as our client. We charge those fees to the broker, knowing full well that the broker then passes those fees back on to the client. And they'll sort of they'll take a step back and they'll say, it's not us. What do we know? We just charge these to the DTC and the DTC does whatever they want with it. Make no mistake, as an issuer, you are being charged by your transfer agent for DWAC fees. And I think it's really important to understand it's not something that you should gloss over when you're having a conversation with them. Because of what we've done at Vinyl in terms of automating the issuance, the release and issuance, and delivery, subsequent delivery of shares, we don't charge DWAC fees. And so if you're paying $175 a DWAC transfer and you're doing that, 3-4 times a week, that adds up. If you've got 3 letters that go out in a day, it adds up. And Vinyl, because of its automation, we've eliminated the human involvement in most of these transactions. And we can say definitively, we are not going to charge you a DWAC fee if you sign up with Vinyl. It is a more efficient engine. And as a result, we're leveraging technology to solve for things that historically humans have solved for in transfer agents.
So that can save companies $50,000, $100,000, a couple $100,000 a year, depending upon how much activity they have. So that could be pretty substantial if you're doing the analysis.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, are you charging it on the other side? Is it, are they finding other fees that compensate for you not charging DWACs? I think that's just what people are wondering.
Yeah, no, we just have if you think about the way transfer agents do business today, the vast majority of them are moving paper around. They're not processing a transaction until the package shows up at their door. And if you do that, you are inherently reactive and you are inherently a services organization by default and maybe exclusively. Vinyl is a technology platform that is supported by a services organization. We can do everything on a forward-thinking basis. We can take instructions programmatically. And so we don't need to charge more in other pockets to make up for the operating costs of, moving the paper around. Our perspective on this is that the transfer agent business model frankly needs to change and has been nickel and diming clients for a very long time. And Vinyl represents, because of our systems and our automation, the ability to help clients avoid that and have greater cost predictability and frankly do it more efficiently.
Okay. So yeah, people really will understand what their costs are up front instead of at the end of the year when they have to go explain it to the finance group what happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've only got a few minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about the global nature of these plans. So we talked a lot about the US and what we're doing here, but Carine, I would assume most of your clients have participants in other countries, shareholders in other countries. How do you see the transfer agent supporting those people? Are they able to get the money that they need? Any comments on the global side of things?
On the global side of things, we haven't really experienced any issues with it. The transfer agents have been able to support any countries where participants have been located. I think the tricky one that we run into is really like Israel, where it's the trust.
Right.
And sometimes in the UK, but other than that, we find that they are able to support most countries where participants lie.
Okay. Yeah. And Rob, do you want to make any comments on Israel? Most of these plans have Israeli participants in them. Can you comment on working with the trust or any issues there?
No, it's, in this space, everything is only as good as the provider that you have. And so we work with a number of great Israeli trustees that I think are very forward thinking. Now, where we do see issues is in restricted plans on the medallion side. It's very difficult for international shareholders to get medallion signature guarantees.
Yeah.
And because
are you just out of luck?
Some people are. I think, it depends how hard you want to look and, how savvy you are in trying to navigate the financial services ecosystem internationally. But, I think that's the advantage of working with Vinyl is that we do have international KYC and QIB, and it eliminates the need for medallion signature guarantees in a lot of capacities. And so much of what we do is predicated on, eliminating the friction there, and that being one of the most frictionful points of interaction with a transfer agent is something that we set out to solve pretty early.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, I'm lucky I can probably find a bank that can help me, but if I'm sitting in, Munich, it might not be so easy to find somebody who will do this for me or even understand what I need. Let me finish up with one question on AI, because that's what it's the buzzword everybody's asking. So Rob, how do you see AI impacting the transfer agent world? I mean, everyone's talking about the fact they have it, but since you guys are so technology forward, what's your position on this?
I mean, we're early days, but I could see AI and task agents in whatever shape, they come in resolving most of the operational requirements within transfer agency. I think the challenge that legacy transfer agents will have over time is that if everything starts in paper, you're sort of behind the 8 ball in terms of your processing time and your ability to tap into some of these AI-driven solutions. We are foundationally an AI native business. We use it to write code. We use it to direct certain actions today, and we'll see that increase over time to read documentation, et cetera. But I don't, very candidly, I don't think that the technology is in a place today where you can say definitively this doesn't need a human. There are certain objective tasks that AI can perform on behalf of a transfer agent, but we're not quite there yet in terms of letting it run free and not needing to have a system of checks and balances. We do, however, believe that in a paperless world we can automate or make self-serve in a very pleasing UI UX 80 to 90% of the work that a traditional transfer agent does. And we have every ambition and every intent of doing that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people confuse machine learning with AI. And I think my previous employer, we were very focused on machine learning, trying to do repetitive tasks and have the computer do it for you instead of a human. And but Carine, when you talked about the issue around pulling from the wrong reserve, if it's not clear in the document, then the machine is just going to do whatever, and a human might say, "Oh, this is incorrect." So it could add more problems to the whole process. I guess it has to be done very carefully.
I should just note really quickly on that front, whether we are integrated with a plan administrator or not, we can actually map the DWAC letters to automatically or programmatically ingest the records to eliminate that friction. So what you end up seeing with the traditional transferation is that they get the DWAC letter and then somebody manually enters the information or clicks a drop-down box to select a reserve pool, which is inherently prone to human error. With Vinyl, I wouldn't describe it necessarily as an AI problem so much as a data mapping problem. If the account is set up correctly, you can actually automate that and completely eliminate the risk. And that's what the Vinyl platform is built for.
Right. Well, along with technology comes the risk for fraud. So I'm curious if either one of you have run into any of these issues. When COVID hit, I was working for a transfer agent, and I remember our first few phone calls. It's like, we can't send everybody home because we need all these people in the office pushing all this paper around, because the capital markets will come to a grinding halt if the transfer agent isn't working. And that was the first time I really opened my eyes to what an important part of this is. But at the same time, and I think Rob, you and I have talked about this, that the fraud that can happen out there is scary, because if the wrong person goes in and sends in a request for share ownership and that transfers, one, I'm curious who's at fault there, who's on the hook for that, and two, how often are you seeing things like that? I'll give that to either one of you. Oh, Rob, you're on mute.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out right at the end, Carine.
Oh.
Apologies. What was the question?
Just asking about fraud and who's on the hook if something bad happens, and what are you seeing? Any scary stories there? I don't know, Karen, did you want to share any stories?
I just think from our side, we don't see it as much. We've had one or two instances. Yeah, we've had one or two employees come to us saying like, someone tried to access their account at the transfer agent, or whether or not it was the platform that the client was using. But I think from our standpoint, there's some safeguards in place where now the brokers can kind of stop the fraud from happening and shares being transferred out. So it's not so much on our side that we see it.
Yeah. I talked to an issuer last week who said they're working with one of the legacy transfer agents. They've had 10 instances of fraud in the last 6 months, primarily social engineering driven. I think that's so much of that is a result of, these businesses historically having operated just with human judgment. And we actually view technology from a very different perspective, is that fraud was rampant in the absence of technology, and technology can deliver a much higher degree of objectivity, as evidenced in the medallion signature guarantee, which is basically just a stamp on a piece of paper relative to some actual verifiable and tangible inputs in identity, in validating someone's identity. But ultimately, I think you'll find more often than not the transfer agent is liable in cases where the transfer agent executes a transaction that is fraudulent without having the appropriate checks and balances. Obviously, if your identity gets taken over entirely, that's a different story, right? That's identity theft. But in terms of fraud that the transfer agent's liable for, we've seen cases over the last couple of years of transfer agents getting fined millions of dollars for not having the appropriate systems in place. And I would argue that more often than not, technological systems are better at sussing out fraud than humans are. And marrying the two together is the best of both worlds, where you can say, hey, our system flagged this as potentially fraudulent. Now we need to go and look at this from an anomaly detection perspective. And systems will only get more secure over time. And on the same side of things, I think fraud, perpetrators will only get more sophisticated with time. And so it is an arms race, a perpetual arms race that will kind of continue to see proliferate over time. But I would note, for anybody who's not, forward thinking about their technology, they're going to fall behind in that capacity. And like, if you are not SOC 2 Type 2, if you're not GDPR, CCPA, ISO 27001 compliant, how could you possibly keep up with fraud actors? It seems like an impossible task, and it probably is. And so, if you're vetting a transfer agent, I would ask for a SOC report. If you're vetting a transfer agent, I would ask for all these validations of certification, because there is an extraordinary amount of PII on transfer agent systems that needs to be heavily guarded and protected.
Yeah, and a huge amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. Well, this has been great. Karen and Rob, thanks for your time and sharing your expertise. And hopefully this has demystified a little bit about what a transfer agent does, but also shown some of the vulnerabilities that you really need to check at. And if I can say anything else, do not wait until the S1 is being filed to select your transfer agent. Do your due diligence and really review the capabilities and check into, what other people are thinking about the different transfer agents that are out there. It is a somewhat small world these days. When I was up and coming, there were probably 150 transfer agents to pick from. There aren't that many now. So I would recommend that people really do the review and talk to other clients of the transfer agents to see what they think. And someone like yourself, Karen, you work with so many of them. So Thanks again for your time. We are going to take a break in August, and then we'll be back in September and October. September, we've got a very interesting conversation with someone from Morgan Stanley talking about their new work report on work. So it'll be interesting on that. And in October, we'll be talking to Mayor from Slice, talking about stock plan compliance. So look forward to that. But thanks so much for your time, and hope everybody has a great day. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
We thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar with Karen, Rob, and Carine. For more information, please scan the QR code for their LinkedIn pages or visit us on countsy.com. Please stay tuned for our upcoming webinars. On September 16th, we will discuss the 2025 Workplace at Work report with Rodney Bolden from Morgan Stanley. And on October 14th, we will have a discussion with Maur Lafran from Slice Global about compliance and reporting in equity compensation. Please follow us on our LinkedIn page for any updates on the upcoming webinar, and we are looking forward to seeing you at our next one. From all us at Countsy, thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.